Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. We just wanted to go ahead and hop on and get people in the chat sharing where you're joining us from, what your role is with your organization. And then finally, if there's anything else you'd like to share, either about the weather or something that you're passionate about, we always love kind of getting that chat going. So I know here in Indiana, where I'm based out of, we've had really glorious weather, a real nice tease of spring. So I've been enjoying that. But I know the cold weather is coming back for us here in a couple of days. So I'll just have to take that tease of spring and hopefully carry it through for until we actually get there. But okay, we'll give it just one more minute. Everybody just go ahead and the chat, if you're not familiar, is at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So just go ahead and share there. Awesome. All right at the top of the hour. So we'll go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I know everyone is taking a break probably from their very busy day or hopefully joining us and in a little bit of calm here as we talk through navigating the narrative, governance, and leadership in an era of higher education skepticism. And if you're in this industry, which I know all of you are, I'm sure you've kind of felt that. So I think this is a very timely conversation. So my name is Lavon Simpson. I'm the director of marketing at Boardable. So excited to have all of you here joining us. But I am joined today by Chris Lowery, who recently retired after serving as Indiana's Commissioner for Higher Education. So we have someone with just the right expertise to be sharing this narrative with us. So Chris, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Lavon, thank you. Thanks for your kind words, and thank you, Lavon and Boardable, for asking me to do this. For those in the audience, it was so interesting when we touched base for the first time about 3 months ago, and I think, Lavon, you started to tell me about Boardable, and I said, "Well, I know Boardable. I use Boardable currently, and have in other board roles." Currently at the United Way here in central Indiana. So anyway, thank you for making this possible. This is an important topic. And I was delighted to look at the list of individuals who had signed up. I think I looked at that yesterday. And also just pleased that we have an audience from a broad geographic region, not just in Indiana and not even just in the United States, but other places, including I noticed Zurich, Switzerland, and some other places. And also very glad to see some folks joining us today who are friends. So thank you. We're going to dive into this topic, and I want to share some insights with you, some based on experiences of my own, having served as commissioner here in Indiana for about 4 years, as Lavon said, and prior to that for about 8 years as a senior leader in higher education here in our state, active nationally. And also based on my own experiences from about 20 years in the private sector. The reality is we need to think about how to navigate the landscape today. It's not a mystery to any of us that there is an air of skepticism around higher education. It's broad, and it is deep at times. You know, I've taken note, and I have to say I was particularly aware of this during my term as commissioner here in Indiana. None of this would surprise most of you, especially because you're connected to this sector and to this industry, if you will, in one manner or another. And you certainly consume news, as all of us do. Uh, the narrative is really strong, and it's hitting, I think, a variety of different individuals who are engaged in the education decision process. So it's not just students who are sort of being hit with a barrage of often negative information about higher education, but it's also people around them who influence them, loved ones, parents, spouses, and so forth, but also employers. We see the impact to government leaders and others. It's ubiquitous too. These are only a few examples of places where I have certainly seen news that's not very favorable toward higher education. And it seems to be, really specifically around a couple of key areas, and we'll delve into those. What the costs are or are not, and what the outcomes look like. So again, I've seen it as you have, social media, sort of mainstream media, and the picture is often just incorrect. Yeah, I thought I'd share a story, and some of you on the call today who I've known for a long time may have actually talked with me about this in the past. But one of my favorite publications is the Wall Street Journal. I take the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times daily, and also take the Weekly Economist and certain others. But probably 2 to 2.5 years ago, maybe three, I had a call from someone whose writing I really enjoy at the Wall Street Journal. And I had been making quite a bit of noise here in Indiana about the decline of the college going rate of youth. So individuals coming out of high school or recently having graduated from high school. And in making that noise, one of the points that I had really been raising, our team had been raising, was that not only was it was declining even worse so for young men. And had quite a few things to say about that, and challenges that we're now facing because of some of that. Well, the reporter called and wanted to talk about that at first, and quickly we were able to dive into the value perceptions of higher education. And I thought it was almost stunning to me. He said, paraphrasing here, "So, Chris, why do you think there's such a strong feeling of people questioning the value of higher education?" And I kind of laughed and I said, "Doug, you're serious?" And he said, "Well, yeah, what do you mean?" And I said, "The Wall Street Journal has had front page feature stories in recent months." And I said, "Let me give you the general picture of what has been, or the general idea of what has been painted in this picture. Individuals graduate with $250,000 in debt. They can't find a part-time job, and it's in some odd major that no one has ever heard of." And I said, "Now, I've taken a little liberty there, but I said, Doug, we're fighting against that." I said, "The reality is in our state, the average student who has any debt when graduating as an undergrad is around $30,000. And we know the outcomes, and I'll share some of that with you in a moment. We know the economic and social outcomes absolutely improve with educational attainment at each level." And so we had this wonderful conversation, and it was just very interesting because he sort of apologized, and I said, "Look, I'm not asking you to apologize. First of all, you didn't write those, but we could do better reporting on what the actual facts are. And certainly, cost is something we have to keep in mind. We have to mitigate as well as we can, and we have to be focused on outcomes. But the news is not always correct, and I think if we're professional about it and push back on it, we'll find advantages in doing so. So this is what really captured my attention about 4 years ago now, when I became commissioner for higher education. And by the way, this is what had happened is not a lot different than what had happened in other states across the United States. The college going rate, again, youth going to college from high school or shortly thereafter, had just declined precipitously. In our own state, over a 10-year period, 2012 to 2022, the college going rate had dropped from 68% to 53%. And again, very similar trends as sort of slope of the curve across the nation. And this was particularly alarming to me for a variety of reasons, not least of which is the impact to the economy, but even more so, and even more importantly to me, the impact on individuals' lives, and then right in sort of concentric circles, the lives of the loved ones around them, friends and family and community. And that this was something we really needed to have our eye on. And we began really shaping our strategy, our messaging, and so forth around what might be able to be done about this decline. One of the things that we did after kind of cleaning up some programs and both from an administrative standpoint, and I'll touch on some of those, and from a legislative standpoint, so from a public policy, legal standpoint, was to really try to determine with better answers what the realities are around the value, perceptions, and realities of higher education. Again, I think if we pay attention only to traditional media and social media especially, we enter an echo chamber, and as all of us know, the algorithms take over, and what seems like this ends up looking like this. Um, Again, we have challenges for sure, but our view was we needed to understand how the consumer was thinking a lot better. And that includes the student, that includes family members, that includes, you know, coaches and employers and others who have impact around decisions that students make. So this research, we hired what we believe to be one of the best firms in the United States, Heart and Mind Strategies out of Washington, D.C. You can look them up. Their work is really incredible. Um, the research went on for nearly a year, and it was very deep, both quantitatively and qualitatively. If anyone's interested in it, you're welcome to reach out to me. I'll make sure Lavon shares my contact information. But it went really deep on a whole lot of levels, including 90-minute individual interviews, small groups, of course, representative sample surveys, and so forth. And again, across high school students, young adults, adult students, general population, and so forth. We wanted to get into the minds of those individuals and understand what they were thinking about higher education. And then, on, a layer out from there, people who, in one way or another, quite frankly, influence the decision making of students who are, contemplating going to college, what their perceptions were, and so forth, and of course, across all demographics. This was one of the most important slides that we found. And the researchers were critically important in helping us suss out this information and really truly to determine how we should be, getting into the thinking of individuals who were making a consideration around higher education or who were near the person making that decision. And as you can see, the particularly the yellow bars and the dark blue bars almost always are very significantly different. The one exception is adult learners. What you can see is that if whether higher education is important or not, it scores very high again among all participants, with the exception of adult learners. But again, where there is a difference that we found uh, very important as we were, contemplating our strategy is the difference between how someone views it in terms of whether it's worth the investment and if it's worth the cost. Not surprisingly, and you'll see this in a moment, cost came out as a really big factor for individuals. However, part of what we kept going back to was that people still see this as worth the investment and as important. So those, again, were very important for us to consider, how we began to address this value perception of higher education. Um, so this was perhaps the most startling finding that we had, and that was that across all populations, demographically, the from the student to those around the student, helping maybe influence or make those decisions, um, individuals vastly overestimate the true costs of higher education. I would point out to you too, there was a very interesting report that came out from the Brookings Institution just in the past week that talked almost about the same thing, and that the reality is the net price of college education over especially the last decade to decade and a half has not increased, especially when adjusted for inflation, and here in the United States. And so this was critically important to us in the research, and I won't go into all the details of it, but individuals were asked what they thought the cost for various components of higher education were. And they estimated roughly 2 times the actual sticker. Well, as most on the call would know, or probably all of you on the call would know, the sticker price, of course, is even higher than what is typically the net price. It's typically about 2x to the net price. So when you put this math together, people have an overestimated understanding of cost by as much as 4 times. So that is a real challenge. And for us, the basic thing came down to how do we help folks understand there are ways to mitigate those costs, even when understanding what the net price is. And in our instance, what it took was a little bit of soul searching to say, do the programs that we have in our state, and I've listed some, you're welcome to look them up. The commission, by the way, has a great website. The team there just does incredible work. But the programs that are really foundational to the higher education strategy here in Indiana, do individuals know about those programs, and do they understand them well enough? Well, generally, especially at that time when the research was being done, the answer was no. That while we are certainly fans of all of those things you see listed there, that help bring down the actual cost to a very much more manageable net cost, vastly students and even oftentimes K-12 educators and families and so forth really didn't understand what those programs were, how to access them, et cetera. I highlighted one, or put in bold one, and that's our 21st Century Scholars Program here in the state. And it's a promise program. So many states have promise programs for students who are generally in middle or high school and then planning to matriculate, focused on low-income students. I'll share with you in the later part of the presentation here uh, what we were starting to discover about that program, and how we were able to take a step that we think is going to very appreciably uh, impact favorably the college going rate here in Indiana. So when we think about cost, and if we realize again that individuals overestimate the sticker cost of college education, and that, of course, that is higher than the net price. When we talk about those things, and we either set them aside or say, yes, we can mitigate that enough for individuals so that this is manageable, what comes next? Well, it's making the career decision. It's very interesting in listening, especially to students, and especially the younger the student, this is the case even more so. Students are very confused about what they might want to do from a career standpoint, which then leaves some of them almost paralyzed to make a decision about what he or she wants to study, what they would select for a major, and how they maybe see their lives unfolding. It's a real challenge. The the depth that students went into in terms of uh, how this not only frustrated them, but also for many it was just depressing. And as you would guess, a lot of times students will literally opt out of going to college because it's just sort of it's almost a morass for them, and it's so confusing. And the reality is, I think in most states in the United States, that career coaching at the high school and even middle school level has been fairly limited. We have wonderful folks in our high schools, counselors and teachers and administrators doing work, but there hasn't been enough focus on helping students understand what that next step is, regardless of whether it's going into college, whether it's going to a trade, or whether it's going directly to the workforce. So that is an area that we have got to do a much better job of addressing. One of the other things that we came upon in this research specifically was digging down further from the career side of this, career coaching, the need for career coaching, decision making, and drilling on down to the other decisions. For example, what might I major in as a prospective student at a college or university? And that was a nugget, or a thread, I guess you might say, that we decided to pull. Our own research uncovered and showed, not surprisingly, that in the past 20 or so years, the number of degree programs in the United States has grown by about 40%. And Indiana was squarely in that range. And, it's just, we were right at the national average. And the students were telling us it just exacerbates their decision making. So in our instance, we looked at the very low uh, completion programs, many of which had no completions, but were still on the books, and moved on legislation to address that. Some good news out of this. So, thinking of the cost, and again, we're going to come back to that, but how do we mitigate that? How do we reduce that, but also help inform students and their loved ones better? Thinking about career coaching, again, I know many states have taken measures, especially in the last couple of years. Our state has too, to provide better career coaching. But then a third really big finding for us was that parents really matter. Um, it's really funny, and probably many folks on this call also. My wife and I, we have children who are now in their 30s, but we remember those days, especially when our children were teens, and just thinking that we were probably the last people to whom they would look for advice, at certain times as teenagers. Uh, and in fact, in our research, parents did not believe that they were the best source of information. They would pick a coach, they would pick, a counselor or somebody else. But in fact, students value their parents more than they do anyone else for this kind of information. Now, that said, what we also found out from parents, and following the research, doing other conversations and small group gatherings, was that parents oftentimes lack the information with which to help their student, their child, make good decisions. So that is another area that we in higher education can do a better job of. Again, to me, this was almost like a gift, realizing this and saying, okay, we have to figure out how to do that, but we certainly have the information that can bolster what the institutions are doing as they think about having students come to them. The Strata Education Foundation, probably many, if not all of you on this webinar today are aware of the Strata Education Foundation. We're very lucky in Indiana. They happen to have two headquarters, one in Washington, D.C., and one right in downtown Indianapolis. In fact, it's across the street from where my office at the commission used to be. And their strategies and their research parallel very much so the research we did with Heart and Mind Strategies. In fact, we shared our research with them. It wasn't very surprising to them, but again, what they have shown is that to increase the college going rate, to increase our post-secondary attainment rate, students are looking for, and we really need to be focused on clear outcomes for those individuals, quality coaching, affordability, work-based learning, and employer alignment. And for us in Indiana, between our own research, our own data that we were starting to really dig into, and having such a great partner literally across the street from us, all of this started to provide a great roadmap for us to put together a vision and a strategic plan, which we did, to start addressing these things. Um, one of the things that, as I've had just a wonderful opportunity to speak on this topic over now several years, oftentimes there is either directly or implied in a statement or a question, why is this also important? Why does this really matter? And this was one of those sort of serendipitous things. When I started as commissioner about 4 years ago, um, I was in my office on the very first day, just trying to dig into everything, and I stumbled on some data, state and national data that is reported every month, that I thought, oh, we should really be paying attention to this in our work, our relationships with the universities, with businesses and others, and that is information that connects to and really underscores for everyone the importance of post-secondary attainment. So a bit of information was contained in those reports that I was looking at, and then of course our team went forward and built additional information around it. This slide and the next one, I don't think will surprise any of you, but the importance of it is that it's documented. and that we're able to use it. I'm able to use it. I've spoken to small groups of a half a dozen and groups exceeding 1,000 people, and to bring this information forward is often very eye-opening, even for individuals who are uh, either deeply connected to or very tangentially related to what's going on in higher education. So you can see from the economic metrics, we looked at it from the four basic levels that a lot of government organizations look at it, whether it's Department of Labor or others, that as you progress up the post-secondary attainment ladder, um, life improves in terms of the economic metrics. That is specifically so with the unemployment rate, labor participation rates, median wages, and average net worth, or wealth creation, if you will. And what I found stunning, I left my job. I semi-retired, retired back in the fall in October. That we had been tracking this data at that time for, once we put it all together, for about 3.5 years. This was something that each month I delighted in seeing, because as you can see, there are no statistical aberrations in this data. In other words, as we see the progress from one educational attainment level to the next, it improves. There was not 1 month in that entire time that something jumped out and we said, "Oh, okay, that's an outlier. Why is labor participation rate at that educational level higher than at the next one higher, or on any one of those four, in any one of those four columns?" So um, that reality for us, and then for policymakers with whom we shared this information regularly, and the state still does, um, and other interested parties, was just so important in not just structuring of our strategy, but also the messaging that we were taking forward. Of course, not only on the economic side of it, but again, probably not surprising to anyone on this call, the social metrics, the social outcomes for individuals can be quantified and do show that, of course, there is improvement. Um, I think the one that always struck me, and you can look to a variety of global organizations that recognize this. Infant mortality is one of the best measures of the health of a society, and looking at those numbers alone should give one pause. That going from as high as 10 per 1,000 to as low as roughly 3 per 1,000. That is dramatic. But in each one of these instances, utilization of SNAP benefits, utilization of Medicaid, infant mortality, and of course life expectancy. Um, we did some work in our own state to, I think, help underscore and verify uh, the the extent of this data all the way down to the county and zip code level. And without getting into it really deeply, to help make our point around the importance of attainment and the impact that it has at the economic and social levels, uh, we started comparing oftentimes zip code areas that were not very far apart, 5, 6, 7 miles away. And there was one particular zip code in our state where we realized that the difference between a zip code that has a whole lot of economic and social challenges, and two different zip codes that are anywhere from 6 to 8 miles away, the life expectancy difference between that zip code and the other two was 16 to 18 years. That, again, if that doesn't give us pause and help us all think about why we have to get this right, I'm not sure what will. And then additionally, the Medicaid uh, data in here became something about which we really began talking with others, including policymakers. For many states in the last 2 years, uh, states have found themselves facing a budgetary kind of hole, if you will, because of the growth in Medicaid. And my point was, I don't have a short term solution to that, but what I would posit is that if we continue to help focusing on moving people up the educational attainment ladder, we will see people move out of the need for support such as Medicaid. We know this to be true, and we can see it again even in zip codes. And I would suggest too that we have seen this kind of impact in other countries who have really done a stunningly good job at focusing on post-secondary attainment. So how should we be thinking of this? I think there are a lot of ways to make this overly complicated, overly complex. But it seems with any organization or ecosystem, if you will, and I often think of the higher education world as an ecosystem. I've always viewed it viewed it for many years here in Indiana as such. So how might we think of in the higher education ecosystem and those organizations that surround it and support and partner with higher education? What can we start doing? Well, I think snapshots of performance that can really be can be pulled apart to find specific initiatives and work going on can have a lot of impact. And I'll show an example here, an idea in a moment. Um, but but to bring everyone sort of to the same page, whether that's an organization or an ecosystem like higher education in Indiana and the Commission for Higher Education, having those snapshots and having really crisp clarity around what's trying to be done, being very transparent about it, can lead to and should lead to alignment. So I'll give you an example here. Um, this is a really simple format. It was something that the corporation I was with for 20 years, Hillenbrand. It was a publicly traded company at the time. One of the national consulting firms created. It's a much more than one page. It's a very layered look at how you're taking your vision and bringing it to reality. It's something that we use at the corporation, and many other really fine uh, private sector entities used it. To make a long story short, this is something that we began doing in Indiana, especially at the commission, to think about the work that was ahead of us, thinking about increasing post-secondary attainment and what that might do. This, as I was referring to in the earlier slide, helped to bring clarity, uh, not just for the leadership team at the commission and then the leaders with whom we were working at our especially public higher education institution, but across the higher ed ecosystem in the state, but also with our commission members or our board of directors. Here in Indiana, it's a commission, so we have a 14-member board of directors, if you will. But being able, with a snapshot, or this is affectionately referred to as strategy on a stick, help individuals see where things stand at almost any given moment, at least on a monthly and quarterly basis. And for us, the guideposts in all of this, why are we doing this? And thinking back to those economic and social slides I was sharing, those impact slides. But our goal, our vision and mission was to increase economic and social mobility and prosperity, one, and to make sure that employers and the state have the talent they need. There are so many other things that we could have in there. I spend quite a bit of time working on and being involved in civics education and frankly trying to restore some of the civility to our society. So there are things in there that I know inherently higher education plays a very big role in it. But being discreet enough with this that multiple audiences affected could understand and buy into that was really important for us. Um, the next column is around strategic objectives, and with each of those, it's important to look at from X to Y by when. And in Indiana, I referenced to you earlier, and again, very similar across the nation. There had been a decline in the college going rate. By the way, it's a little frustrating. That data is generally 2 years lagging, so you have to look to other metrics, and I'll reference those in a moment. But it's talking about how and the ways in which we would be increasing the college going rate to eventually increase the attainment rate. So starting with that, 53%, and then a goal of 60% by 2030. Of course, getting students in is one thing, and then getting them to complete, helping them to complete is another thing. Beyond that, we took notice, and sort of selfishly, I hope other states don't do this. Um, I'm only kidding, but we realized we could be doing a better job of retaining our graduates once they completed college. So we wanted to measure that, and then we started grabbing a hold of it's a wonderful tool. If you're not familiar with it, I'd suggest you become familiar with it. It's the Human Development Index. It ranks every country in the world, and it ranks subnational um, uh, government systems, whether that's a state or whether it's a territory, province, and so forth. And it's a wonderful ranking, and it really almost exclusively focuses on the educational, economic, and health issues that I was generally referring to in the previous slides. And then, of course, our post-secondary attainment rate and wanting to drive it up. You'll see then that there are strategic initiatives that fall out of each of these. Now these I made a little bit different than what we had used at the commission, just to help drive some points home here. Um, we know to increase that college going rate, we've just got to do a better job as an ecosystem of higher education, along with our partners, of clarifying what the true costs are, and that includes not only helping folks understand, whether it's a student or their loved ones, what the true costs are, but ways in which to mitigate them, whether that's through a grant or whether that's through a scholarship or something like that. That we've got to find better ways to help students from a career coaching standpoint. And I would advocate very strongly that is not only in the middle school and high school years, but also in the post-secondary years, in colleges and universities and trade schools and so forth, helping students understand how to take those steps to begin their career journey. Measuring at the college and university level, parental engagement. Again, to me, that was just a wonderful thing to discover, that parents matter a lot more than even what they think, and probably with respect to the attention we have been giving them. And as we think about value, what does the ROI model look like? And that can, of course, take on a number of forms. I didn't place the rest of them, but I'm going to, here in a second, uh, home in on one of those. And I can see my PDF didn't bring it forward, but what I wanted to focus on for just a minute was in that going rate, and specifically clarifying the true costs. So breaking that out, and again, I apologize that Lavon and I did this PDF right before starting, and the little format on the lower left didn't come through. But in our instance, we looked at the college going rate and said, okay, clarifying costs, and again, helping people understand, helping them mitigate the costs and so forth, was really important to us. Uh, Much earlier in the presentation, I had highlighted and mentioned that I would talk about one program, and that's our Promise program here in Indiana. Um, Students in middle school who essentially qualify for free and reduced lunch are eligible to be 21st century scholars. And a wonderful program. It pays for tuition and fees. And then, as you might expect, many, if not most, institutions come alongside the student and help with room and board. It's just a truly wonderful program. Well, as we dug into this and started, asking people how much they knew about the program, whether that was students or schools or parents and so forth, we realized we had a gap there. And it was this simple. In a team assessment of the performance of that program, again, around since 1990, uh, what we realized digging into the data was that only about half of the eligible young people uh, were actually getting signed up for this program. That for roughly 30 years, a little over 30 years, we had been spending an inordinate amount of resources trying to find those students, trying to find those kids, get them signed up, and get them on the right path so that when they were in high school, they would do all the things that are required of this program to be able to go to college for almost free. And so that was a catalytic moment for us to realize this incredible program was only being utilized by about half of the young people who qualified. Um, our first major decision was to ask, if we know who these students are, then why wouldn't we just automatically enroll them? You know, yes, it's been done this way for many years. Why wouldn't we do that? They qualify. These are the standards. Let's just do this. And the answer was, you know, uh, yes, why shouldn't we? Well, the answer also, contained within that was, well, there will be a fiscal impact. I have to admit, I was a little glib about that when someone thought they were pointing that out and really informing me about something. And I said, "Oh, I fully realize that there will be a fiscal impact, but I'm also certain, and would bet money if I was a bettor, that we can show the ROI is incredibly positive for our state." To make a long story short, that's exactly what we did. Um, we joined forces with multiple organizations that are part of and partners to higher education in Indiana, um, across business, education, government, uh, philanthropy, and nonprofits to support this work. And again, to make a long story short, a couple of years ago, that legislation passed unanimously in our legislature. One of the biggest pieces of legislation in our state in years. And the first students who were affected by that, a year from this August of 2027, will begin matriculating to college. And we know, because we're also looking at other leading indicators, their preparedness and so forth, we know the college going rate is going to go up significantly. Why did I choose that? Because you know all of this can become really complicated, but when we zoomed in on this, we found that cost was misunderstood, and that was incredibly important because people really do value the investment, the cost, what it is, what mitigates it, etc. Breaking that apart, again, this is just one example. I could go through, if we had more time today, and I'd be glad to talk with any of you offline. I could go through with you a dozen things that we decided to attack, and bring our partners around it to change how our ecosystem was looking at it. Uh, the ones below this that you can see on the screen really affected just the work that our agency was doing. The agency has outreach coordinators across the state, 9 of those who work with school systems to help students, et cetera. Well, for many years, their resources, their time had been spent mostly chasing down these kids and helping get them signed up. Well, that changed almost overnight to being able to support the students, to support counselors and teachers and parents and others, so that the student could become an even more effective student while she or he was in high school. And with that, what we also know we're going to start seeing is that um, students will also complete at a higher rate in our state, because we have research that shows 21st century scholars, um, who are low income students, have performed vastly better while in college than their low income peers who did not end up being part of the program. So, our state has already begun to forecast on that, and we're encouraged by it. You know, the the last thing that I have as a slide to share with you, I think is really important, and it's really part and parcel to this, reflecting back to the research, reflecting back to the conversations that ought to be taking place in not just a university or a college, but in partnership, again, with business, government, education, philanthropy, nonprofits. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And that's the learning of this. Uh, when we try things as public policy or programmatic change, uh, we should have a very firm idea of what its success is going to be, but we need to track that. And I would contend we really need to think about our data um, through the lens of insight. And lagging data, for example, the college going rate or the post-secondary attainment rate in our various states or countries, it's a lagging number, typically 18 to 24 plus months. So some of those things, we have to wait to see the outcome of. But there are other factors that we can start looking at. And I know in our instance, while we have been waiting to see that college going rate improve, what we have seen is that other initiatives are showing an increase in enrollment. So just recently, we were able to count the fourth year of straight enrollment increases because of these various programs. And with that, we're able to forecast that the college going rate, as it's a lagging report, will come up. And then lastly, using some forecasting to say, what do we expect this policy decision or this initiative to do? And then digging into it with this slide causes a robust discussion. What did we learn? And what is the impact? And how might we, instead of waiting, for example, 30 years for a cornerstone program, how might we see what the impact could be um, rather than keeping things the way they are? There's so much, Lavon, we could have talked about today. And I really am hoping that participants will reach out and just, talk about this if they would like. And I can also point them toward folks who might be able to share something valuable also.
No, I appreciate all of this. It's been so insightful, and it's so interesting to see some of those trends and just get your take on that. We did have a couple of questions come through, if you're okay with answering a few of these.
Wonderful.
So I love the strategy on a stick format. And I think a lot of people did. But how do you take something like that and make sure that it actually becomes something valuable that your organization uses on a regular basis instead of just becoming one of those planning documents that you sometimes refer back to, but it doesn't really have an impact?
Yeah, I think the leadership is fundamental in that. Pardon me. During my time in the private sector, a couple of different times, I ran strategy for portions of the company. And we took a very strong view that what we never wanted to end up with was some 60-page document that we all felt really great about when it was finished, and then it sat on a shelf and collected dust. Um, a point, and I'm so glad someone asked about this. One of the things I think is just so impactful about that one slide, and of course, again, you should have layers underneath it for departments, and whether that's vertically or horizontally in an organization, you should have it broken down then for each part of it. But that document, and I'll go back to it, Lavon, if you think about it, it can be used with anyone in the organization who's doing her or his work. And whether it's a supervisor or whether it's the president of a university or a commissioner of a commission, you should be able to then take that document with the person who is the outreach coordinator in the northwestern part of your state and show that person how they tie all the way back to the vision or the mission in this instance. And it's a splendid document to use with boards of directors, boards of trustees, and so forth, right? Because those individuals are all very busy people. I've been on a number of boards. I'm on some today, and I've helped recruit people. And I'm always very clear. We're asking you because we know you're a busy person. We know you don't have the bandwidth to do this, but that says something about you, and we want you on. We want you with us. This can be given to the chair of a board of trustees at a university to say, this is the high level of how we're doing. And similarly, in a company or in a agency or something like that. But it requires, in my strong opinion, it requires the senior leader and senior leadership group to say, this is something we shall do, and it will be updated very regularly. Um, I would mention this to you. We were proud about something in terms of using these tools and so forth, and it never occurred to me this would happen. But after we set this up in late 22, I came on board there in 22 in the spring. Um, Something I didn't realize we had was a semi-annual review of how things were going with our agency with the Office of the Governor, and it was I don't even know how to put it. It was so satisfying, or I guess gratifying, to hear their comments because, whether it was with the governor or chief of staff or, another key figure in that organization, uh, we were able to boil it all down to a matter of a few minutes. And of course, then we could dive deeper if that was a request. But again, back to that question, it absolutely takes commitment from the senior leader and his or her team. But I will tell you too, there's it's not selling, but there's a bit of socializing that needs to go on with it when you start doing this. And again, I have felt very strongly in various roles I've had over the years that when I have been in the senior leadership role, people need to hear it from that individual. We're going this direction. This is part of what will be our culture. They have to hear that directly from the person. And then if they want to ask really hard questions, uh, my view is the senior leader should be answering those.
I completely agree. I think that transparency is so important. And I think it really helps when you can tie in the work that you're doing to that bigger mission overall. And I think that's incredibly important. So you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but those board of trustees, those board of directors, they're busy people. But how
Yes.
should they be helping to shape that narrative that we're kind of talking about? But then also, how can they just continue to help with that socializing and that storytelling?
Yeah. I'm going to mention something I'm sure didn't expect me to say this, but I'll tell the folks here. Maybe I mentioned at the beginning. I currently, one organization on whose board I serve right now uses Boardable, and another I had been on, used Boardable, and I mentioned that to you very specifically in the group here, having been on many boards of directors, boards of trustees over many years. Uh, Figuring out what to do with all the incoming information can just be a veritable nightmare, and figuring out how to track and keep files and things like that. But a platform, a tech platform, Boardable, in my instance, has just been one of those places where it's easy to access what's going on. It's easy to access, and I think this summarizes priorities of an organization to access those priorities and then go, oh, it's really easy to find right over here. Here's the strategy on a stick, and right over here are the metrics, and these are the metrics for the marketing team, and this is how we're doing financially, and so forth. Um, but back to your question, I think it's really important to have those leaders involved in. Um, at least the final take on what the overall strategy looks like. It should be up to the individuals who are hired, the CEO or the commissioner or the president, whatever that person is, that person and his or her team. It should be up to them to bring forward to the board of trustees, whomever it is, what they're seeing, the whys of this. In this instance, there's research behind this, qualitative and quantitative, and to say, here it is, and it's wet cement, or the ink is still wet. What say you? Because again, I will think back to the commission as an example, and they still have, leaders who are very prominent business people, and very prominent people in philanthropy, and very prominent, very successful people in the nonprofit world, right? So they're across all of those spans, and if we're not tapping into them for their expertise and their thoughtfulness, I think we're really missing something. These are uh, yeah, almost all the time people who bring a unique view. There's a couple sayings that I subscribe to, and I have for years. That probably a couple folks on the call who know me well are going to go, I know what he's going to say. Um, and I really believe this. I believe it about everyone, but then when you think of a board of trustees or something, particularly so. My belief is I have never been the smartest person in the room. Uh, Even though I have been entrusted to lead various organizations, with, uh, you know, very extensive budgets. At the commission, our budget was roughly a $500 million. And at the college, we had nearly 200,000 students, and I was on the president's cabinet and so forth. And for me, even though I had been entrusted with those things, I always try to keep in mind that, and especially so with boards of directors and trustees, that I've never been the smartest person in the room, and each person, Lavon, on this call today, and I really mean this, knows things I don't know. And if we were to say we're going to go form this organization over here, there are individuals who would absolutely contribute much more than I would contribute. And then the other one is, and that's part of the reason I'd like to know more of the people on this call today. Everybody is just more interesting than me. I just turned 64, and I know me very well, and I know that each person has such great stories that I just don't know. So.
Yes, I don't know about more interesting than you in the stories that you've shared with me. They're very interesting, but I completely agree. I love pulling from the brain power of other people. So important to do. So one last question before we end here. I was really interested in the fact that parents are still the most influential voice in higher education, just because there's so much noise out there for young people today. How do you recommend institutions communicate with parents to better equip them to help those young people?
Yeah, I think I think it begins early. We have to do a better job in um, K through 12. And I say that, by the way, as someone who's married to a retired English teacher and who served for 12 years on a local school board. That we've got work to do in that space. There's so many things that I think are examples of where we do spend our time, and it's not to diminish those at all, but to recognize in our heads the priority we place on it. I'll give an example, and this is at the K-12 level, and then I'll shift over to the higher ed level. um, I had a crazy idea. There were better ideas that came forward, but in the K-12 space, what if we allowed, especially in the middle school and high school levels, teachers and others who work for the school system, certified and classified students, to be part-time career coaches and pay them a stipend? In the school corporation I was part of the board of, by the way, it's a great school corporation, and has set a lot of really standards here in the state. It's Batesville Community School Corporation. You can look them up. Um, but in any that school corporation, as an example, has maybe 2,200 students in it. I was trying to count in my head one day across middle and high school the number of coaches or assistant coaches the organization has for sports. And I came up roughly, long after I'd been on the board, I don't know, 80 to 100. And these are folks that get paid $750, $1,500 to coach students on something the student loves and they love. And I thought, gosh, what if we tapped into other educators and said, how would you like to be a college coach, a career coach? You know, Figure out the forum, and you get $750 a year, or 1250, or whatever that reasonable number might be. You could have a veritable army of people helping students understand these things better. And I think it would show a real respect to the educators to say, you've got something to offer here. Okay, you're not a football coach person. Yeah, maybe you don't like it. Maybe there are sports you don't like. And I'm not picking on sports. They're really important to our family. But I think those types of ways, and by the way, the nugget for that came from somebody else that caused me to think about that. And I think once we get to the college age of this, we have really got to start focusing on communicating directly with parents. We um, we went to this was 3 years ago. We stole the idea from the state of Idaho. By the way, they were the first that we saw doing this really well. The idea of sort of like a direct admit program for we started with our state institutions, and said, look, state and then our private institutions also came along. We said, look, you tell us the cut scores. GPA and or SAT. We've got lists over here we can get from K-12 showing GPA. In our state, all juniors take the SAT. You tell us what they are, and in late August, early September, the year before the student would, be leaving to go off to college, we'll send the student a letter saying, here are all of them to which you've been accepted. Wow. I was, in various careers for over 40 years, never was involved in anything that received such positive impact or positive feedback, and specifically from parents, because we sent a letter specifically to parents. Uh, Lavon, I had people I've never met taking photos, and these are like hard copy letters, and sending to me, my information's out there, email and all that, especially while I was serving, and just saying, this is incredible, this is crazy, stories that my kid was going to go to, over here, another state and so forth, and now has it narrowed down to 3 institutions in Indiana. And I would say we now have great examples of universities doing that. I'll pull the thread of the University of, I'm sorry, Indiana University to Indianapolis. They've constituted a program. I can't remember the exact parameters. I think it's 3.0, with the Indianapolis Public Schools and other public school corporations in the area for a direct admit program. And they reach out to parents, or they reach out to, guardians, the adults around the student. And I think that direct outreach, finding times also to bring parents together, whether it's something on campus, whether it's something in a community, that may not be your own community where the institution is located, but in the case of IU at Indianapolis, going out, because I think they're doing this now, to other spots around the state, and hosting a convening for parents. Yeah, and having folks there who can say, yes, I've got the answer on those scholarships for you. Yes, we can help you figure this out and help you figure that out. I think they're a gold mine. I think there's such great potential in reaching parents more effectively.
I think that's absolutely true. And I love the idea of meeting them where they're at and just creating those communities, and getting the word out. But thank you so much for your time today. This has been just so impactful, and education is so important. So thank you for coming on with us today and chatting with this group. We really appreciate you.
Well, Lavon, it's been a joy. I only wish I could have, if we had more time to interact with the
I know.
folks online. And please, I would be very comfortable, if you wish to share my email with, everyone on the call, and
Okay.
please reach out. I'm still very passionate about this, but thank you for bringing everyone together today, Lavon.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.